I'm Jessica Miller, 26, a nurse at Boston Memorial Hospital. After an 18-hour shift during the worst flu outbreak in years, I dragged myself home only to find my key wouldn't work. Exhausted and confused, I thought it was a mistake until I saw her face through the window. My stepmother Diane had changed the lock 6 months after Dad died. Standing there in my scrubs, I realized the home I grew up in wasn't mine anymore. If you've ever had the rug pulled out from under you, you'll understand what comes next. Before I continue, let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe to hear more stories about overcoming life's unexpected challenges. Nursing wasn't just a career choice for me, it was a calling. I'd spent 3 years at Boston Memorial since graduating from nursing school, working my way up to the intensive care unit. My journey to becoming a nurse began when I was 15, caring for my grandmother who had Parkinson's disease. Watching her struggle made me want to help others, and seeing how the visiting nurses eased her pain inspired me to follow their path. That day had been particularly brutal. We were severely short-staffed due to the flu outbreak that had swept through Boston. 4 nurses had called in sick, leaving us scrambling to cover twice as many patients as usual. I'd handled 3 code blues in my section alone, 2 elderly patients with pneumonia complications and a 30-year-old with unexpected cardiac arrest after flu-induced myocarditis. By hour 16, my feet were throbbing in my compression socks, and I'd barely had time to eat half a protein bar or drink enough water to keep my mouth from feeling like sandpaper. When my supervisor asked if I could stay an additional 2 hours until the night shift arrived, I couldn't say no. That's the thing about being a healthcare worker. The patients always come first, even when you're running on fumes. Dad would have understood. He always did. James Miller had been my rock, my biggest supporter when I decided to pursue nursing. "Jesse," he'd say, "helping others is in our blood." He'd been so proud when I graduated, sitting front row at the ceremony with tears in his eyes. His sudden heart attack 6 months ago shattered my world. At 58, he seemed too young, too vital to be gone. One day we were planning a fishing trip like we'd done every summer since I was a kid, and the next I was planning his funeral. Dad had been a structural engineer, practical in all things, including his will. He'd left the house to me, the colonial 2-story in Somerville where I'd grown up, but with the provision that Diane could continue living there for 2 years. It seemed reasonable at the time. After all, they'd been married for 3 years, and despite our somewhat distant relationship, I never imagined there would be problems. The house had plenty of space for both of us, and I appreciated staying there while paying off my substantial nursing school loans. Boston's housing market made moving out nearly impossible on a new nurse's salary. Even studio apartments within reasonable commuting distance of the hospital started at amounts that would eat up most of my monthly income. Living at home meant I could chip away at my $87,000 in student debt while building some savings. Diane hadn't seemed like the evil stepmother type when Dad first introduced us. She was a real estate agent, always well-dressed with a ready smile, though something about it never quite reached her eyes. She made Dad happy, and that was what mattered to me. After they married, she redecorated parts of our family home, replacing Mom's old floral curtains with modern blinds and changing the kitchen from its warm yellow to a sleek gray. Small things that stung but seemed petty to complain about. After Dad died, our already distant relationship grew colder. We existed in the same space but rarely connected. She started taking more phone calls in private, having whispered conversations that abruptly ended when I entered a room. I chalked it up to grief. Everyone processes loss differently. That day, trudging up our front walkway at 11:30 p.m., all I could think about was a hot shower and my bed. The maple trees Dad and I had planted when I was 10 cast long shadows from the streetlights across the lawn. My scrub smelled of hospital disinfectant, and I had dried coffee on my sleeve from when a patient's family member bumped into me hours earlier. My hair was pulled back in a messy bun that had started the day neat and professional. I never expected what happened next would leave me homeless. The night air had that particular New England chill that seeps into your bones, not quite winter, but autumn making its final stand. A light drizzle had started during my drive home, speckling my scrubs as I walked from my car to the porch. The porch light was on, which was normal. Diane usually left it burning until she went to bed around midnight. When my key wouldn't turn in the lock, I initially blamed my exhaustion. Maybe I wasn't aligning it properly. I pulled it out, examined it in the yellow porch light, the same key I'd used for years, with the small scratch on the shaft from when I dropped it on concrete last year. I tried again, more carefully this time, but it still wouldn't budge. That's weird, I muttered, trying to ignore the creeping dread building in my stomach. I moved to the back door, navigating the stone path Dad had laid himself the summer before I started high school. Same result, my key slid in but wouldn't turn. Through the kitchen window, I could see the lights were on inside. Diane was definitely home. Pulling out my phone, I called her number. I could hear her ringtone through the door, but she didn't pick up. After the 5th ring, it went to voicemail. Diane, I'm locked out. Can you let me in? I just worked 18 hours and really need to shower and sleep. I waited, then tried knocking. Soft at first, then more insistently. Finally, I heard footsteps approaching the door. Diane? My key doesn't work. Can you open up? I saw her silhouette through the frosted glass panel of our front door. She didn't immediately open it. Jessica. Her voice came through clearly but with an unfamiliar coldness. I've been meaning to talk to you about this. I've decided it's best if you find your own place now. I stared at the door in disbelief. What? Diane, let me in. It's late, I'm exhausted, and this isn't funny. I'm not joking. I've changed the locks. Your father's been gone 6 months, and I need my space. But the will, Dad left the house to me, with you having the right to live here for 2 years. You can't just lock me out of my own house. My voice rose, cracking with a mixture of exhaustion and panic. The arrangement has changed. I've spoken with my lawyer. You'll be hearing from him soon. Her tone was businesslike, as if she were explaining terms to a potential home buyer. This is illegal. You can't do this. I was fully shouting now, not caring about the neighbors who might hear. As if on cue, the porch light next door flicked on. Mrs. Abernathy, our 70-year-old neighbor who'd brought me homemade cookies every first day of school until I graduated high school, peered out her window with concern. Is everything all right, Jessica? She called. The humiliation burned hotter than my anger. Standing there in my dirty scrubs, locked out of my own home, being watched by the neighbors, it was a nightmare. Everything's fine, Mrs. Abernathy. Just a misunderstanding, I managed to call back, my voice tight. Through the door, Diane said flatly, you should find somewhere else to stay tonight. Your things will be packed and ready for pickup next week. I'll text you when. Diane, please. At least let me in to get some clothes and my toiletries. I just worked a double shift. I have nothing with me. I'm sorry, Jessica, but I think a clean break is best. Good night. I heard her footsteps retreating from the door. I knocked again, harder this time, then pressed the doorbell repeatedly. The porch light switched off, plunging me into darkness save for the glow of street lamps. I tried calling her cell again, then a third time. Straight to voicemail. She'd turned off her phone. The reality of my situation crashed over me like a wave. I was homeless. In my scrubs. With nothing but my phone, wallet, and car keys. I sank down onto the porch steps, the concrete cold through my thin uniform pants. The drizzle had turned to steady rain, but I barely noticed as it soaked through my clothes. Mrs. Abernathy called something else to me, but I couldn't process her words. I just sat there, staring at the door to my childhood home, trying to make sense of what had just happened. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I dragged myself to my car. Sitting in the driver's seat, I watched the rain create rivulets down my windshield and tried to figure out what to do next. With shaking hands, I called my best friend Amber. The digital clock on my dashboard read 12:17 a.m., but I had nowhere else to turn. Jess? Amber's voice was thick with sleep. Are you okay? Did something happen at the hospital? The sound of her concern broke something in me. I burst into tears, trying to explain between gasping sobs what had happened. She did what? Amber was fully awake now. Stay there, I'm coming to get you. I can drive, I said, wiping my nose with the back of my hand. I just need somewhere to stay tonight. Of course you're staying here. But you're in no condition to drive across Boston right now. I'm calling an Uber. Just wait in your car until I get there. I sat in my cold car for 40 minutes, alternating between stunned disbelief and flashes of rage. How could Diane do this? What possible legal grounds did she have? And why now, when I was at my most vulnerable? As I waited, memories of warning signs I'd ignored began to surface. Diane asking pointed questions about my career plans and how long I intended to stay at the house. Her recent meeting with a man she'd vaguely identified as a financial advisor. The way she'd been subtly encouraging me to look at apartments, suggesting that at my age I surely wanted my independence. Amber arrived in an Uber SUV, jumping out before it had fully stopped. Her dark curls were hastily pulled back, and she wore sweatpants with her jacket thrown over a pajama top. She pulled me into a fierce hug as soon as I stepped out of my car. I can't believe this, she said, helping me into the Uber. We're going to figure it out, okay? Amber lived in a tiny one-bedroom apartment in Jamaica Plain with her boyfriend Kyle, who was waiting at the door when we arrived. They immediately made up the couch with sheets and a pillow, Kyle disappearing into the kitchen to make tea while Amber found me a clean towel and some spare clothes. You can shower and change, then we'll talk, she said. Or if you just want to sleep, we can figure everything out tomorrow. The hot water of the shower brought a temporary relief. I stood under the spray until it began to cool, trying to wash away the physical and emotional grime of the day. Amber's oversized Boston University t-shirt and pajama pants were clean, but they weren't my own. Nothing was my own anymore. When I emerged, Amber and Kyle were waiting with chamomile tea and concerned expressions. The reality of my situation hit me anew. I have nothing, I said, my voice hollow. No clothes except what I wore today. No toiletries. My laptop, my photos of Dad, all my important documents, birth certificate, passport, nursing license. It's all in the house. We'll figure it out, Kyle said firmly. First thing tomorrow, we call a lawyer. That night on Amber's lumpy couch was the first of many. I tossed and turned, jolting awake repeatedly with the disorienting panic of being in an unfamiliar place. By morning, dark circles ringed my eyes, and my back ached from the uncomfortable sleeping arrangement. Thankfully, I wasn't scheduled to work again until the following day. Kyle helped me research affordable legal aid while Amber lent me more clothes and basic toiletries. We found a lawyer named Tyler Wilson who specialized in housing disputes and offered a free initial consultation. You need to document everything, Tyler advised when we met with him that afternoon. Every communication with Diane, every attempt to retrieve your belongings. Massachusetts law is clear, she can't legally evict you without proper notice, especially given the terms of the will. The legal options sounded promising, but they would take time during which I had no access to my possessions. Returning to work the next day was a struggle. I wore borrowed scrubs from the hospital's emergency supply, unable to access my own. The familiar hospital corridors felt like the only normal thing in my appended life. My supervisor Laura noticed something was wrong immediately. Jessica, are you all right? You look like you haven't slept. The kindness in her voice nearly broke me. During our break, I found myself in her office, explaining my situation through occasional tears. I'm essentially homeless, I concluded. Living on my friend's couch while trying to figure out the legal mess. Laura's expression had grown increasingly concerned. Jessica, we have resources for staff in crisis situations. Let me connect you with HR, there's an emergency assistance program that might help with temporary housing costs or legal fees. Her support was a lifeline. The hospital's employee assistance program offered 3 free legal consultations and a small emergency loan to help with immediate expenses. It wasn't a solution, but it was something. Meanwhile, my attempts to contact Diane went nowhere. Calls went unanswered, texts unread. I drove by the house several times, but she was either not home or ignoring the doorbell. I left notes that disappeared from the door without response. After a week, Tyler secured a police escort for me to retrieve essential belongings. The officer who accompanied me looked uncomfortable with the whole situation as Diane finally opened the door, her expression cold and composed. "You have 30 minutes, she said, standing aside. Walking into my childhood home as a visitor escorted by police was surreal. I headed straight for my bedroom, only to find it had been stripped of most personal items. My clothes were haphazardly packed in garbage bags in the corner. Family photos were missing from their frames. "Where are my father's things?" I asked, my voice shaking as I re-entered the living room. "The fishing tackle box, his watch collection, our photo albums?" "I've relocated James's personal effects," Diane said, examining her manicured nails. "They're being appraised for estate purposes." "They're not yours to appraise," I protested. "Those items have sentimental value, they're specifically left to me in the will." "You can take that up with my lawyer," she replied smoothly. "Your time is running out. I suggest you focus on your essentials." The police officer shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, she is entitled to her personal property. And she can have what's in her room," Diane countered. "The rest is under dispute." I grabbed what I could: clothes, my nursing certification, some toiletries, my laptop, and the few photos that remained in my room. As I was rushing to finish, I spotted a small framed photo of Dad and me fishing that had somehow escaped Diane's purge. I snatched it, along with my birth certificate, from my desk drawer. As I was leaving, Diane said quietly, "He always liked me better, you know. Said you were too much like your mother, stubborn and naive." The words were calculated to wound, and they hit their mark. I hurried out with my garbage bags of belongings, fighting back tears until I was safely in my car. The next 3 weeks were a blur of work shifts, legal consultations, and uncomfortable nights on Amber's couch. The hospital staff rallied around me. Nurses from my unit organized a donation drive for household essentials I would need when I found a new place. An older doctor who had treated my father during his heart attack quietly handed me a check to help with legal fees. But the strain was taking its toll. I lost weight, my scrubs hanging loose where they'd once fit perfectly. Dark circles became permanent fixtures under my eyes. I nearly made a serious medication error during one shift, catching myself just before administering the wrong dosage to a patient. Something had to give. And soon it would be me. "Your father's will is fairly straightforward," Tyler explained as we sat in his modest office the following week. "He left the house to you, with a 2-year residence provision for Diane. However, there's language about reasonable cohabitation that Diane's lawyer is exploiting." "What does that even mean?" I asked, rubbing my temples. A persistent headache had taken up residence behind my eyes. "They're arguing that your relationship has deteriorated to the point where cohabitation is no longer reasonable. It's a stretch, but it's giving them enough to stall." Tyler shuffled through the documents. "The good news is, we can file for an emergency injunction to get you back into the house while this plays out. The bad news is, these things take time. Courts are backlogged." I sighed, glancing at my watch. I had a shift starting in 2 hours and still needed to pick up fresh scrubs from the hospital's laundry service since I had limited sets of my own. "How long are we talking about?" "Best case? 2 weeks. Worst case? Could be a couple of months." My heart sank. 2 more months of homelessness, of living out of garbage bags in the corner of Amber's apartment, of imposing on my friend's generosity. What about my father's personal effects? The things she's relocated? We've included those in our filing. The will specifically mentions family heirlooms and personal possessions going to you. As promised, Tyler filed for an emergency injunction later that day. We also requested a formal court date to address the housing dispute based on the will's provisions. With those legal wheels slowly turning, I tried to focus on work and finding a more permanent housing solution. The following week, we were granted another police escort to retrieve more of my belongings. This time, I came prepared with a detailed inventory and my copy of Dad's will, highlighting the sections about personal property. Diane was visibly annoyed when we arrived, especially when the officer handed her the court documents. "This is harassment," she said, but stepped aside as the officer firmly reminded her of my legal rights. I went straight to the attic this time, where Dad had stored many family treasures. To my dismay, several boxes were missing, including the one containing our holiday ornaments, many handmade by my mother before she passed away when I was 12. "Where are the Christmas decorations?" I called down the stairs. "And Mom's memory box?" Diane appeared at the bottom of the attic stairs. "Donated." The house needed decluttering. The casual cruelty of it stole my breath. Those irreplaceable mementos of my mother, gone. I gripped the attic railing to steady myself. "You had no right," I whispered, my voice choked. "I had every right. This is my home now, and I won't live surrounded by another woman's memories." Her voice was ice cold, but there was a flash of something else in her eyes. Satisfaction at my pain. I forced myself to be methodical despite my churning emotions, documenting everything I could find and everything that was missing. The officer, to his credit, carefully noted the missing items in his report when I explained their significance. In Dad's office, I found file cabinets partially emptied, with gaps where important documents should have been. His computer was gone, as was the external hard drive where he'd kept family photos. "She's erasing him," I said quietly to Tyler, who had accompanied me this time. "Erasing our family history." "We'll add it to the complaint," he assured me, taking photos of the office for evidence. The legal process ground forward with excruciating slowness. Each day was a struggle to function normally at work while my personal life remained in chaos. Financial strain added to my stress, legal fees were mounting, even with Tyler's reduced rate for hardship cases. During a particularly difficult night shift, I nearly made another medication error, catching myself just before administering the wrong dose of insulin to a diabetic patient. Shaken, I asked a colleague to double-check my work for the remainder of the shift. My supervisor Laura noticed. "Jessica, can I see you in my office before you leave?" I expected a reprimand, but instead, Laura closed the door and asked gently, "When was the last time you had a full night's sleep?" The simple question broke through my carefully maintained facade. I burst into tears, unable to remember the answer. "I'm going to arrange for emergency leave," she said firmly. 3 days, starting now. "You're not safe to practice in this condition, and you know it." She was right, of course. My professional ethics had been warring with my desperate need to keep working and earning. If I made a serious error, a patient could die. "I can't afford time off," I protested weakly. "You can't afford not to take it," Laura countered. "Go home, well, to Amber's, and sleep. That's an order." As I left the hospital that morning, an overwhelming sense of failure crushed down on me. I was failing my patients, failing in my fight for my home, failing to honor my father's memory and wishes. For the first time, I considered giving up the legal battle. Maybe I should just let Diane have the house, find a tiny apartment somewhere, and try to rebuild. The thought followed me into an uneasy sleep on Amber's couch and haunted me when I woke. Had I been naive to think I could win against someone as calculating as Diane? Was I throwing good money after bad with the legal fees? That evening, I attended a grief support group at the hospital, something Laura had been encouraging me to do for months. Sitting in the circle of chairs, listening to others share their losses, I found myself unexpectedly angry at my father. When my turn came to speak, the words poured out. "I'm angry at my dad. He thought he was protecting me with his will, but he left so many loopholes. He trusted my stepmother when I always sensed something was off about her. Now I'm homeless, fighting for what's rightfully mine, and he's not here to help." The group facilitator nodded. Anger is a normal part of grief, especially when we feel abandoned by someone we relied on. Later that night, as I was changing into borrowed pajamas, I found my father's old watch in my scrubs pocket. I'd grabbed it from my locker at work, one of the few possessions I'd had with me the night of the lockout. Dad had given it to me when I graduated nursing school, saying he was passing on his most valuable possession to his most valuable creation. I ran my thumb over its worn face, remembering how he'd encouraged me when nursing school became overwhelming. "Millers never give up," he'd say. "We find a way forward, no matter what." Holding the watch, a memory surfaced. Dad in his study, showing me a secret compartment he'd built into his desk. "Every man needs a place for his important papers," he'd winked. Had Diane found that hiding spot? Did she even know it existed? For the first time in weeks, a spark of hope ignited. Tomorrow, I would talk to Tyler about getting access to Dad's study again, this time with a very specific purpose. By week 3 of my displacement, the toll was unmistakable. Amber and Kyle had been saints, but their one-bedroom apartment wasn't designed for a long-term guest. The couch that had initially seemed acceptable now tortured my back nightly. I'd developed a persistent crick in my neck that no amount of stretching could alleviate. My emergency leave had ended, forcing me back to work despite my deteriorating physical and mental state. I functioned on autopilot, double and triple checking every medication, every procedure, terrified of making a critical error. During a particularly busy afternoon shift, the dam finally broke. A patient coding, alarms blaring, the controlled chaos of a resuscitation effort, all familiar territory that suddenly became overwhelming. After we stabilized the patient, I felt a wave of dizziness wash over me. I stumbled to the supply closet, closed the door, and sank to the floor, my scrubs soaking up the disinfectant that had spilled earlier. The tears came without warning, silent, convulsing sobs that shook my entire body. I pressed my fist against my mouth, desperate to stay quiet as my colleagues worked just outside the door. That's where Laura found me 10 minutes later. "Oh, Jessica," she said softly, kneeling beside me despite her bad knees. "This can't continue." "I'm fine," I insisted, wiping futilely at my face. "Just needed a minute." "You're not fine. None of this is fine." She helped me to my feet. "I'm sending you home and extending your emergency leave." "This isn't a request." "I can't afford more time off," I protested. "The legal fees, finding a new apartment, I need every hour of pay I can get." "What you need is to not collapse. Or make a mistake that ends your career." Laura's tone was gentle but firm. "The emergency assistance program can help more than you've allowed it to. And I've spoken with administration about your situation, they've approved paid administrative leave for 2 weeks." The kindness undid me again. "I don't deserve this." "Yes, you do. Now go home, well, to Amber's, and really rest. Not just physically, but mentally. Step back from everything and figure out what you truly want to do next." Back at Amber's, I finally admitted to myself how close I was to complete burnout. The constant stress had worn me down to a shell of myself. I'd lost 12 pounds in 3 weeks, weight I couldn't afford to lose from my already slim frame. My hands shook constantly, and dark circles had become so pronounced under my eyes that no amount of concealer could hide them. That night, alone in the apartment while Amber and Kyle were at work, I hit my lowest point. Curled on the couch, I stared at the ceiling and contemplated giving up. Maybe I should tell Tyler to stop the legal proceedings. Except that Diane had won. Use what little savings I had left to find a tiny studio apartment and start over. For the first time, I felt anger toward my father bubble up again. Why hadn't he protected me better? Why hadn't he seen through Diane? Had he really believed she would honor his wishes after he was gone? "You abandoned me," I whispered into the empty room. "You left me vulnerable to her, and now I've lost everything, not just you, but our home, our memories, everything." The grief and anger swirled together into something toxic. I hadn't felt this untethered since the day Dad died. That feeling of having the ground torn out from under me, of free falling through space with nothing to grab onto. I must have fallen into an exhausted sleep because I jolted awake hours later, disoriented in the dark apartment. My phone showed 2:17 a.m. As I shifted to find a more comfortable position, something hard pressed into my hip, Dad's watch, which I'd taken to keeping in my pocket. I pulled it out, the dim light from the street lamps outside catching on its face. Dad had worn this watch every day for 20 years. It had been on his wrist through every important moment of my life: graduations, birthdays, fishing trips, the day he walked me into my college dorm. Running my fingers over its worn leather band, I remembered his voice so clearly: "Millers never give up." It was like a switch flipped inside me. Dad hadn't abandoned me. He'd raised me to be strong, resourceful, and determined. He'd given me the tools I needed to fight back, I just hadn't been using them effectively. I sat up, suddenly wide awake. The secret compartment in Dad's desk, I needed to get to it. Whatever was hidden there might be the key to understanding why Diane was so desperate to erase our family history from the house. For the first time in weeks, I felt a surge of energy and purpose. I wouldn't give up. I would fight for what was mine, for my father's legacy, and for justice. The next morning, I called Tyler as soon as his office opened. "I need another supervised visit to the house," I said without preamble. "There's something specific I need to check in my father's study. We can request it, but it might take a few days. Diane's lawyer has been fighting these visits." "Then fight harder," I insisted. "This is important, Tyler. I think there might be documents my father hid that could help our case." While waiting for the court to approve another visit, I used my unexpected paid leave to research Diane more thoroughly than I had before. If I was going to battle her effectively, I needed to understand who I was really fighting. I started with basic social media searches, then moved to public records. What I found was illuminating. Diane had changed her name 10 years ago from Diane Calloway to Diane Reynolds. Further digging revealed a pattern of short marriages to older, financially secure men, each ending shortly after their deaths or with a generous divorce settlement. Armed with this information, I asked Tyler to expand our investigation. He hired a private investigator who specialized in legal cases. The cost split between my dwindling savings and the hospital's emergency assistance fund. 2 days later, I received a call from the investigator. "Ms. Miller, I found something interesting about your stepmother's past. There was a legal dispute in Springfield 5 years ago, remarkably similar circumstances involving the adult daughter of a deceased man." My heart raced. What happened? The daughter eventually settled, walking away from the property dispute in exchange for a cash payment. But here's the interesting part: there were allegations of document manipulation that never got fully investigated because of the settlement. This was the confirmation I needed. Diane wasn't just opportunistic, she was a practiced predator with an established pattern. The court finally approved our visit for the following day. I barely slept that night, my mind racing with possibilities. What would I find in Dad's secret compartment? Was it still intact, or had Diane already discovered it? When we arrived at the house, Diane was coldly composed as usual, but I detected a flicker of unease when I headed directly for Dad's study. "There's nothing in there you haven't already seen," she said, following close behind. "I'll determine that for myself, thanks." I was done being intimidated by her. Dad's study looked different. She'd replaced his old leather chair with a modern white one, and his fishing trophies were gone from the shelves. But the heavy oak desk remained, probably too cumbersome to replace quickly. I sat in the unfamiliar chair and ran my hands along the underside of the desk, feeling for the hidden catch Dad had shown me years ago. Diane watched with narrowed eyes as my fingers found the small indentation and pressed. A soft click, and the false bottom of the right drawer released. Diane stepped forward quickly, but the police officer moved to block her path. "That's private property," she protested. "Actually," Tyler interjected, "according to the will, Mr. Miller's personal effects and documents belong to his daughter." With shaking hands, I lifted the false panel. Inside lay a sealed envelope with my name written in Dad's familiar handwriting, along with a small leather journal and a USB drive. I opened the envelope first, unfolding several pages of Dad's distinctive handwriting. "My dearest Jessica," it began. "If you're reading this, then my suspicions about Diane may have proven correct." The letter from my father felt like his hand reaching through time to help me. I scanned it quickly, my heart racing as I absorbed his words. "My dearest Jessica. If you're reading this, then my suspicions about Diane may have proven correct. I've noticed concerning behaviors that I've documented in the accompanying journal. I believed I could protect you through my will, but I prepared this backup plan just in case. Diane's past isn't what she's presented. I began investigating after finding discrepancies in stories about her previous marriages. I've stored copies of what I've found on the enclosed drive. Most importantly, I've left a separate, more detailed will with my old friend Michael Donovan. He has instructions to come forward if any disputes arise. This will leave no ambiguity about my intentions for you and the house. I'm sorry if this has become necessary. Know that I love you, and that the house where you grew up should remain yours, as your mother and I always intended. All my love. Dad." My hands trembled as I looked up at Diane, whose face had gone pale. "You knew about this," I said, understanding dawning. "That's why you've been trying to clear out his things. You were looking for this." She composed herself quickly. "I have no idea what you're talking about. James and I had a loving relationship. Whatever paranoid thoughts he had near the end." "Save it," I cut her off, tucking the letter, journal, and USB drive into my bag. "We're taking these items as outlined in the will's provisions regarding personal effects." Tyler nodded, making notes. "We'll be contacting Michael Donovan immediately." "This is harassment," Diane snapped. "You can't just take things and claim they're relevant." The officer intervened. "Ma'am, the court order allows Ms. Miller to retrieve personal documents. If you have an objection, you'll need to address it with the court." As we prepared to leave, I paused in the doorway of Dad's study. "How many times have you done this, Diane?" "Springfield 5 years ago?" "Where else?" The flash of shock in her eyes confirmed what the investigator had found. Back at Tyler's office, we carefully examined the contents of the journal. Dad had methodically documented his growing concerns about Diane. Noted inconsistencies in her stories, phone conversations he'd overheard, and his discovery of court records from her previous relationships. The USB drive contained scanned documents, including her previous marriage certificates under different names, newspaper obituaries of former husbands, and property records showing a pattern of acquiring assets shortly before or after their deaths. "This is substantial," Tyler said, eyes widening as we reviewed the evidence. "But the most important thing is finding Michael Donovan and this alternate will." Locating Michael proved easier than expected. He was still living in Cambridge, where he and Dad had attended college together. When Tyler called him, his response was immediate. "I've been waiting for this call. Jim told me there might be trouble." The following day, Michael met us at Tyler's office, bringing with him a sealed envelope that had been notarized 2 months before my father's death. "Jim came to me very concerned," Michael explained as Tyler carefully opened the document. "He said he'd discovered troubling information about Diane's past and wanted to ensure his wishes for you and the house were absolutely clear. The alternate will was nearly identical to the original, with one crucial difference. It contained a clause specifically stating that if Diane attempted to prevent me from living in the house or accessing any part of it, she would forfeit all rights to remain there." "This is exactly what we needed," Tyler said, unable to hide his excitement. "With this and the evidence of her pattern of similar behavior with other families, we have a very strong case." When Tyler presented the new evidence to Diane's lawyer, the response was swift. They requested a settlement conference, suddenly eager to resolve the dispute without going to court. "They're worried," Tyler explained. "If this goes before a judge with the evidence we have now, Diane could face more than just eviction. There could be criminal charges for previous cases." At the settlement meeting, Diane's demeanor had changed completely. Gone was the Ice Queen confidence, replaced by nervous glances and a forced smile. Her lawyer presented their offer. Diane would move out within 30 days, keeping only the furniture and items she had brought into the marriage. In exchange, we would sign an agreement not to pursue any further legal action related to the will or my father's estate. And the missing family heirlooms and photos? I asked. The things she claimed to have donated or relocated? After some negotiation, Diane admitted that many items were in a storage unit she had rented. She agreed to provide the key and location as part of the settlement. I considered pushing for more compensation for my weeks of homelessness, the legal fees, the emotional distress. But Tyler cautioned me about the length of time further litigation could take. You could pursue damages, but it would mean months more of legal proceedings. The question is, what do you really want right now? What I wanted was my home back. My father's mementos. My life. I'll accept the settlement on one condition, I said finally. I want to inspect the storage unit before signing anything. If family items are missing, the deal is off. Diane agreed, though her tight-lipped expression suggested she wasn't happy about it. The following day, we met at a storage facility in Medford. When Diane unlocked the unit, I gasped. Nearly all the missing items were there: boxes of Christmas ornaments, photo albums, Dad's fishing gear, even Mom's memory box that Diane had claimed was donated. You were never going to donate these, were you? I asked quietly. You just wanted to hurt me. She didn't answer, but her silence was confirmation enough. With the settlement agreement in place, I finally allowed myself to believe this nightmare might be ending. Tyler filed the necessary paperwork, and a court date was set to formalize the agreement. The day before our court appearance, I received an unexpected call from Mrs. Abernathy, our elderly neighbor. Jessica, dear, I've been so worried about you. I'm glad to hear you'll be coming home soon. Thank you, Mrs. Abernathy. It's been a difficult time. There's something I think you should know, she continued. The night before your father died, I saw Diane arguing with him on your front porch. It looked quite heated. I didn't mention it before because I didn't want to speak ill during a time of grief, but given what's happened. A chill ran through me. Thank you for telling me. Did you happen to hear what they were arguing about? Not clearly, but I heard your name mentioned several times. And something about a will. I relayed this information to Tyler, who added it to our file. It may not be relevant to our current settlement, but it should be documented in case further issues arise. The next day in court, the judge reviewed our settlement agreement. Diane sat stiffly beside her lawyer, avoiding eye contact. Based on the evidence presented and the agreement reached by both parties, I'm approving this settlement, the judge announced. Ms. Reynolds is to vacate the property at 47 Maple Street within 30 days, and all items in the storage unit are to be returned to Ms. Miller immediately. It was over. After weeks of fighting, I had won back my home. As we left the courtroom, Diane brushed past me. You're just like him, she murmured. Too stubborn to know when to walk away. I smiled for the first time in weeks. Thank you. That's the nicest thing you've ever said to me. 30 days later, I stood on the porch of my childhood home, key in hand. My key, to my house. The locks had been changed again, this time by the locksmith I had hired after the court formalized Diane's eviction. Amber stood beside me, squeezing my hand. Ready? I nodded, sliding the key into the lock. It turned smoothly, the door swinging open to reveal the familiar entryway. The house smelled different, Diane's perfume lingered faintly, mixed with cleaning products. But underneath was the familiar scent of home. As stipulated in our agreement, she had taken only what she brought into the marriage. The furniture Dad and I had chosen together remained, though rearranged to her taste. The walls had been repainted in neutral colors, erasing Mom's favorite butter yellow from the kitchen and the deep blue of Dad's study. It's going to need some work, I said, walking slowly through the rooms. But it's mine again. The following days were a flurry of activity. Friends from the hospital helped me move my meager possessions back from Amber's apartment. Kyle and his brother assisted in retrieving the items from the storage unit, carefully bringing box after box of family treasures back where they belonged. Not everything had survived intact. Some photo frames were broken, and it appeared Diane had deliberately damaged certain mementos, a crack in Dad's favorite fishing trophy, water damage to some of the older photo albums. But the most precious items had survived, including the hand-knit Christmas stockings Mom had made for Dad and me the year before she passed. The house itself bore subtle wounds from Diane's brief reign. Beyond the cosmetic changes to paint and decor, I discovered more insidious alterations. Dad's carefully organized filing system had been dismantled, important documents scattered or missing. The garden he had lovingly tended had been neglected, the roses he planted for Mom on their anniversary wilting from lack of care. Most disturbing was what I found in his study. Hidden beneath the false bottom of his desk drawer, where I had discovered his letter, was a small hole drilled into the wood, suggesting Diane had found the compartment earlier and accessed its contents before drilling from below to check if anything remained hidden. She knew, I told Amber as we cleaned the study. She must have found Dad's initial research about her and was looking for anything else he might have hidden. Which explains why she was so desperate to get you out of the house, Amber replied. She needed time to find and destroy any evidence. The revelation sent a chill through me. How close had I come to losing everything? If I hadn't fought back, if Dad hadn't prepared that backup plan with Michael, if I had given up during those dark weeks on Amber's couch, Diane would have successfully erased our family's history from this house. Recovery was a process, both for the house and for me. I took 2 weeks to restore the home before returning to work, painting the kitchen yellow again and returning Dad's study to its original blue. I installed a security system with cameras and alert notifications on my phone. New locks with digital keypads that couldn't be easily changed provided additional peace of mind. The hospital welcomed me back with understanding and support. Laura had arranged a gradual return to full shifts, ensuring I had time to fully settle back into my home and recover from the ordeal. "You look like yourself again," she commented during my first week back. "There's color in your cheeks." I felt like myself again too, or rather, a stronger version of myself. The experience had forced me to advocate for myself in ways I never had before, to fight for what was rightfully mine without apology. In Dad's study, I created a memorial corner with his fishing photos, awards, and the watch he'd given me. I placed Mom's memory box on the shelf beside them, finally reuniting my parents in this small way. Their presence felt tangible in those quiet evening moments when I sat in Dad's old leather chair, retrieved from the storage unit, and reflected on how far I'd come. One rainy Saturday, while organizing the last of the storage unit items, I discovered Dad's collection of nursing journals. He'd saved every article I'd ever been mentioned in, including the hospital newsletter that featured new staff members the year I was hired. A small handwritten note on the margin read, "My Jessie, helping others just like she always said she would." The discovery sparked an idea. With part of my recovered savings, I established a small scholarship fund in Dad's name at my nursing school, specifically for students facing unexpected financial hardships or family emergencies. It wasn't much yet, just enough to help one student per year with emergency expenses, but I planned to grow it over time. The James Miller Emergency Nursing Scholarship, I explained to the school's development director. Because sometimes good people need a little help during life's unexpected challenges. Life gradually settled into a new normal. I still worked long shifts caring for patients, but I returned to a home that was truly mine, filled with memories of those who had loved me. The legal battle had drained much of my savings, but the financial security of owning my home outright gave me room to rebuild. Tyler occasionally checked in, making sure all legal matters remained resolved. During one such call, he shared that Diane had left Massachusetts, apparently heading to Florida. "The investigator says she's been spotted in retirement communities there," he added. "Just be careful with any documents or mail that still has her name on it. Monitor your credit, that sort of thing." I had already taken those precautions, but appreciated his continued concern. The experience had taught me to be vigilant, to trust my instincts, and to stand my ground, lessons I wished I hadn't needed to learn the hard way, but valuable nonetheless. 6 months after reclaiming my home, I hosted a dinner party for everyone who had helped me through the crisis: Amber and Kyle, Laura from the hospital, Tyler, Michael Donovan, and several nurses from my unit who had provided emotional and practical support. As we sat around the dining table that had hosted family meals throughout my childhood, I raised a glass and toast. To my father, who taught me that Millers never give up. To friends who become family when you need them most. And to coming home again, even when the path back seems impossible. The journey had been painful, but I had emerged stronger, wiser, and more certain of myself. My father's legacy lived on not just in the house he'd left me, but in the resilience he'd instilled in me, a strength I hadn't known I possessed until it was tested. Have you ever had to fight for something that was rightfully yours? How did you find the strength to persevere when giving up seemed easier? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you found my journey meaningful. Your support helps me continue sharing these difficult life lessons. And remember, sometimes the greatest test of our character comes not from what happens to us, but from how we choose to respond. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you find the strength within yourself to face whatever challenges come your way.